Hello, faithful listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Bible Explained podcast. And hi, my name is Jen. I am the host of this podcast, and we're going to be reading 2 Chronicles chapter 12 today, the entire thing, talking about the life and death of King Rehoboam and how he certainly did not do what God wanted him to do. We'll get into that in just a moment. So the past couple weeks for me have been very snowy. I'm actually looking out on my deck right now, and we probably have a good, I would say, 9 to 10 inches of snow right now. And it just keeps coming down, but it looks beautiful. You know, it's that really like fluffy snow that is really easy to get off your car. So it's nice. It's not like super icy. So I'm thankful for that. Ice is the worst. We had a really icy year last year. And actually my husband fell and like messed up his thumb. So I'm thankful that it's not super icy this year yet. I'm very, very thankful for that. Tell me how the weather is where you guys are. I'd love to hear about that. And if you live in a nice warm climate, please contact me so I can live vicariously through you. You know, I'm just craving some nice warm weather. All right, faithful listeners, don't forget, I am going to be taking a short break from tomorrow all the way to next Wednesday. And then next Thursday, there will be an episode on the podcast once again. And I'm very much looking forward to this week-long break that I'm taking because this is one of the first times in about 8 years that my husband is also taking time off at the same time. So that is why I'm going to be taking this break, is just to see my husband again. You know, it's been 8 years since we spent like an extended period of time together. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And once again, thank you for the time off that you all are giving to me. Let's go ahead and read 2 Chronicles 12, 1 through 16, which is the entire chapter. And we will finish discussing the life of Rehoboam and also the death of Rehoboam and some of the problems that Israel is now beginning to experience under the reign of Rehoboam. I'll be reading this as usual from the WEB. When the kingdom of Rehoboam was established and he was strong, he abandoned Yahweh's law, and all Israel with him. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem because they had trespassed against Yahweh, with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen. The people were without number who came with him out of Egypt, the Lubim, the Sukkim, and the Ethiopians. He took the fortified cities which belonged to Judah and came to Jerusalem. Now Shemaiah the prophet came to Rehoboam and to the princes of Judah, who were gathered together to Jerusalem because of Shishak, and he said to them, Yahweh says, You have forsaken me, therefore I have also left you in the hand of Shishak. Then the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves, and they said, Yahweh is righteous. When Yahweh saw that they humbled themselves, Yahweh's word came to Shemaiah, saying, They have humbled themselves. I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath won't be poured out on Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. Nevertheless, they will be his servants, that they may know my service, and the service of the kingdoms of the countries. So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem and took away the treasures of Yahweh's house, and the treasures of the king's house. He took it all away. He also took away the shields of gold which Solomon had made. King Rehoboam made shields of bronze in their place and committed them to the hands of the captains of the guard, who kept the door of the king's house. As often as the king entered into Yahweh's house, the guard came and bore them, then brought them back into the guard room. When he humbled himself, Yahweh's wrath turned from him, so as not to destroy him altogether. Moreover, there were good things found in Judah. So King Rehoboam strengthened himself in Jerusalem and reigned. For Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which Yahweh had chosen out of all of the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonitess. He did that which was evil, because he didn't set his heart to seek Yahweh. Now the acts of Rehoboam, first and last, aren't they written in the histories of Shemaiah the prophet and of Iddo the seer, in the genealogies? There were wars between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. Rehoboam slept with his fathers and was buried in David's city, and Abijah, his son, reigned in his place. So as we found out in the last chapter, King Rehoboam's reign was pretty rocky. He started out quite bad, actually. Within the first 3 days of becoming the king, he started a civil war. which was not a good look on him. He basically fractured Israel days after becoming the king. So now Israel is split into two separate nations now. The northern nation of Israel was just called Israel, and then the southern nation of Israel was called Judah. And that was where Rehoboam gained a lot of power. So he was down in Judah, and then up north, this guy named Jeroboam was in charge up there. And after all that happened, Rehoboam decided he was going to try to go to war with Jeroboam. But that didn't work out because God specifically told Rehoboam, "You will not go to war with your brothers." So Rehoboam didn't end up going to war and instead decided to fortify all of the cities in Israel. And meanwhile, Jeroboam up north is causing trouble of his own. He's instituting a state-run religion where the people wouldn't have to travel down to Judah, to Jerusalem, to worship Yahweh there. They could just stay in northern Israel and worship Yahweh at these calf idols that Jeroboam had made. So Jeroboam introduced a lot of idolatry in northern Israel. That caused the devout people of Israel to actually leave, especially the Levites, because the Levites were supposed to be the priests of Yahweh. And since Jeroboam made his own religion, he had no need for the Levitical priests. So the Levites actually left to go down to Judah and become priests there. So very few devout people were actually left in northern Israel. And since the Levites went down to Judah, they actually strengthened Rehoboam's kingdom. So much so that Rehoboam was strong, it says, for 3 years straight. Nobody wanted to mess with Rehoboam. But after that happened, Rehoboam's heart started to turn away from Yahweh. And we saw evidence of this in the last chapter when Rehoboam was beginning to marry all of these women, similarly to how Solomon had done. And we know that one of the main reasons Solomon's heart was so far away from God was because of the amount of women that he had married. And Rehoboam is now doing the exact same thing. So it's no shocker when we read our passage for today, and the first verse is, "When the kingdom of Rehoboam was established and he was strong, he abandoned Yahweh's law and all Israel with him." That is obviously what was going to happen when Rehoboam is following all of the bad things that his father did. So Rehoboam's strength did not continue because he abandoned God's law. And we actually find out what Israel did in 1 Kings 14. 2 Chronicles doesn't go specifically into it, but 1 Kings 14 does. So let's read 1 Kings 14, 21 through 24. Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which Yahweh had chosen out of all of the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonitess. Judah did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins which they had committed, above all that their fathers had done. For they also built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every green tree. There were also Sodomites in the land. They did according to all the abominations of the nations which Yahweh drove out before the children of Israel. So it's pretty clear there that Israel fell very hard very quickly. At first they were worshiping Yahweh, but then once everything got comfy and people started getting complacent, they allowed these other idols to come in, specifically the Asherah pole, the sacred pillars, and high places. They built all of these things just in a short time frame after Rehoboam became king, because this would have happened within 5 years of the start of Rehoboam's reign. And notice here, there were also Sodomites in the land, is what 1 Kings 14:24 says. And the entire nation of Israel did according to all the abominations of the nations which Yahweh drove out before the children of Israel. So in other words, the people were once again in these sex cults that were very popular in these days. That's what the Sodomites would have been most likely, were male prostitutes who would sell themselves for sex with other men for like a religious kind of ritual. So homosexuality became rampant in Israel during this time also. And this was all under the watch of Rehoboam. So what ends up happening, turning back to 2 Chronicles 12, in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, the king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem because they had trespassed against Yahweh, with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen. Now, historically, we know that this event actually happened. Shishak was a really pivotal figure actually for Egypt at this time. He made Egypt great again. Before Shishak, Egypt was not nearly as strong as it once had been. And Shishak, I believe, was a Libyan man who went to Egypt and started kind of promoting himself by becoming friends with all of the priests in Egypt. Not to mention, Shishak married very well and gained standing with a lot of the leaders of Egypt, so much so that he ended up becoming the next pharaoh of Egypt. And once he became the pharaoh and started making Egypt really strong again, he started looking outward, like, what land can we take? So when he sees Israel in the middle of a civil war, he's like, boom, that's where we're going to go. We are going to go to Israel and just completely destroy them. And that's actually what Shishak did. He didn't just take stuff from Judah. He actually went into northern Israel as well, because northern Israel, of course, was sinning also. In general, Israel had abandoned Yahweh fully. So Shishak went into Israel and did a lot of damage there. However, God did not allow Shishak to destroy Israel completely, and that's laid out right here. In verse 4, it says, he took the fortified cities which belonged to Judah, and he came to Jerusalem. Now Shemaiah the prophet came to Rehoboam and to the princes of Judah, who were gathered together to Jerusalem because of Shishak, and said to them, Yahweh says, you have forsaken me, therefore I have left you in the hand of Shishak. So in other words, because Israel had forsaken God's law and started doing everything that the nations before them had done, the things that God found absolutely sickening, God says, well, you don't want to worship me? Then I'm not going to be with you anymore because you're worshiping other gods. Let your other gods save you from these problems that you are having. And that word came to Shemaiah the prophet. And once again, this guy Shemaiah, this is like the only time he's ever really mentioned at all in scripture, is right here and in the previous chapter. And not to mention also in 1 Kings, he's mentioned briefly. So he was a prophet that we don't really know a lot about, not mentioned very often in scripture, but yet he apparently played a pretty pivotal role with Rehoboam, telling Rehoboam what God was saying. And so Shemaiah went to Rehoboam and told him, you guys are sinning, and this is why this is happening. And so in verse 6, it says, the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves, and they said, Yahweh is righteous. Whenever you see somebody humbling themselves, that usually means that they admit that they have done something wrong and that they deserve their punishment. So the king and the princes of Israel, the leaders of Israel, now realize that they have done something seriously wrong. And so they do, in fact, humble themselves. And so when God saw, verse 7, that they humbled themselves, Yahweh's word came to Shemaiah, saying, they have humbled themselves. I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath won't be poured out on Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. Nevertheless, they will be his servants, that they may know my service and the service of the kingdoms of the countries. So what God is saying there is that he's going to give Judah some deliverance. They're not going to be completely destroyed. However, they're going to have to serve Shishak, the king of Egypt, specifically for the reason that Israel learns what it's like to serve a human master. That's what God says right here. Nevertheless, they will be his servants, so that they may know my service and the service of the kingdoms of the countries. This reminds me of something that Jesus said in the New Testament. He said, take my yoke upon you, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So yes, we do have a role in serving God. Like when we worship God, when we become Christians, we are serving him. But serving God is so much easier. Like his burden is so light compared to any of the other burdens, any of the other masters that we might serve. And that's what God is saying right here to Shemaiah. He's like, I am going to allow Shishak to come in and take parts of Judah so that Judah learns, is it better to serve a human master or is it better to serve me? So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem and took away the treasures of Yahweh's house and the treasures of the king's house. He took it all away. So all of the wealth that Solomon had built for himself and for Israel is now gone. It is gone. It is now in Egypt. Shishak also took away the shields of gold which Solomon had made. We talked about those a few chapters ago. Solomon had made these just beautiful golden shields that were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars a piece. And he made hundreds of them. So now millions of dollars worth of gold are with Shishak. And Rehoboam has nothing anymore that his father left him. Absolutely nothing. Shishak took it all away, is what it said. So King Rehoboam, in order to keep up appearances, and this is really embarrassing, quite honestly, King Rehoboam made shields of bronze in their place and committed them to the hands of the captains of the guard who kept the door of the king's house. As often as the king entered into Yahweh's house, the guard came and bore them, then brought them back into the guard room. So now all of these beautiful shields made of gold are gone. And Rehoboam, in order to make it look like he is as wise and as prosperous as his father, he replaces the gold shields with bronze. Now, what's embarrassing about that is that when Solomon was the king, you'll remember a verse that said that Solomon made silver as common as the stones in the street. So in other words, silver totally lost its value under the days of Solomon because of how rich Solomon had made Israel. And now Rehoboam can't even replace these shields with other golden shields. He has to replace them with a very cheap metal, specifically bronze. Because, polished bronze, it can look similar to gold, but it's not nearly as beautiful or as expensive as gold was. Rehoboam did this to keep up appearances. It was just a fake imitation that honestly probably didn't even need to be done. But Rehoboam would display these shields every single time he went to Yahweh's house. He was trying to keep up appearances. That was all this really was. And notice that it says that he did this whenever he entered into Yahweh's house. So he was really putting on a show every single time he went to the temple to worship. He would put on this big show to make it look like he was a true Yahweh follower, but yet his heart was not really with Yahweh. Verse 12 says, when he humbled himself, Yahweh's wrath was turned from him so as not to destroy him altogether. Moreover, there were good things found in Judah. So that means whenever Rehoboam truly had a heart change toward Yahweh, God would show mercy on him. And even though Shishak went in and basically looted Judah, there were still good things found in the city. There were still places that were prosperous. There were still people who were wealthy. But overall, the glory of Israel is now essentially gone. So King Rehoboam, it says, strengthened himself in Jerusalem and reigned. For Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which Yahweh had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonitess. He did that which was evil because he didn't set his heart to seek Yahweh. So even though Rehoboam did have moments of heart change toward Yahweh, overall, he did nothing but evil. He didn't truly set his heart on Yahweh the way David had. Rehoboam's heart was constantly drifting with the tides. It was constantly just going wherever he felt like he wanted to go. If he wanted to worship Yahweh one day, he would do that. If he wanted to worship the Asherah the next day, he would do that. He just didn't have a solid foundation in God. So he did evil in the sight of God, is what it said. Now, the acts of Rehoboam, first and last, aren't they written in the histories of Shemaiah the prophet and of Iddo the seer in the genealogies? Now, we don't have either of those books. Those have been lost to history. But that doesn't mean that the Bible is not complete just because it references a book that we no longer have. It probably would be very fun to learn more about Rehoboam and some of these other kings, but God has preserved his word, and we have exactly what we need to know in it. There were wars between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. So that's pretty interesting because in the last chapter, it actually said that Rehoboam did not go out to war when God specifically told him not to. But here we find out that Rehoboam and Jeroboam were actually at war. So it could have been a cold war where there wasn't a lot of violence, or there could have been some battles breaking out here and there, or this could have also been Rehoboam later in life going and attacking Jeroboam, or Jeroboam himself initiating a lot of these fights. So even though Rehoboam didn't initially go out to war with Israel, that doesn't mean that later on he didn't change his mind and just do whatever he wanted to do. Because as we can see, that's kind of how Rehoboam is. He just does whatever he wants to do. Rehoboam, verse 16, slept with his fathers and was buried in David's city, and Abijah, his son, reigned in his place. So we'll talk about the life of Abijah when I get back from my sabbatical that I am taking starting tomorrow. So faithful listeners, I will see all of you on Thursday. There won't be an episode for you members this Friday either, but next Thursday I will be back to do an episode from 1 Timothy for you guys. And then the week after that, we'll get into the life of Abijah, the son of Rehoboam. So faithful listeners, I hope you have a fantastic and wonderful week. I will see all of you guys next Thursday, bright and early, for an episode from 1 Timothy. Happy listening, and God bless.